And we are live in the Midwest. And here it is, we are the 11th of October in 2016, and having flashbacks of the 60s. But that's a whole other dialogue for a different day and a different set of conditions. How are you this morning, Barrett?
I'm doing good, Chris. I actually thought you were just making a joke of that because it's been a long-standing thing the last few weeks of
Oh,
different
yes.
months. So I wasn't sure, like, was this intentional?
Oh, I wouldn't want to break, my own long-standing custom here, but yeah, it kind of keeps everybody on their tippy toes.
It definitely does, and I think that's a good thing. As we were just talking a little bit before we started the recording about dancing, and I love dancing. I think it's a fun thing to do, and it helps us remember to enjoy life and have fun. And it's a beautiful metaphor too, this idea that we can learn to dance through life. We can learn to dance with what life brings to us, rather than kind of being flat-footed or being caught off guard kind of feeling. So I think that's a nice idea for us to have as we live our lives.
Exactly. And in Native American culture, the dance is how we are connected to community, and our song is the story of who we are. So when a Native American says, I would like to sing you a song, he's probably going to tell you about some events in his or her life. And when you are invited to join the dance, you are asked to participate with the entire community in the journey of life. So all the tribal cultures do have that essence to them, and it really is, something that you can identify with and become very comfortable with, um, as part of the culture. So
So here we are, and we are continuing on our segment of looking at the obstacles to peace. And we are moving into the final obstacle, the fourth obstacle, which is the fear of God. As we were kind of talking about this before we started, again, as you were saying, this is the biggie. This is the one that all fear stems from, the fear of God. And it is a mistaken fear. We have nothing really to fear, but we cling very tightly to fearing our oneness, to fearing, totality. And you think about it, it kind of makes sense on one level that if we are one, then we are not a separate self. And that's what we're terrified of. We're terrified of letting go of our individuality. We're terrified of letting go of this little me that I think I am. We think that without this little me, that we wouldn't be anything. But the good news is that when we let go of this little me, we actually become, or re-become, what we've always been, which is everything. And we realize there really was nothing to fear, but we need to move through that fear in order to have that realization.
yes, it absolutely is an enhancement for our existence and for our identity and for just the circumstances of our life in general. Um, and one of the great threats that we encounter in different circumstances is when we cross a line and somebody says, "I'm going to put the fear of God in you," and that's always kind of been a source of a chuckle for me because I never really identified God with fear, even as a child. And so when people would say that, I would just kind of pause and ponder. It's like, well, that's really not very scary to me. But there are circumstances, when you start, even as like I'm, illustrating with myself, even though I'm comfortable with the idea of God's love and God's presence, um, when you start to make that sacred journey toward the holy instant, you do actually discover that there are unrecognized fears that are layered deeply down within your own subconscious from who knows how many lifetimes ago or how many cycles back in time. But it definitely does make for, a surprising experience when you get into that deeper level of just quietude and silence.
Yeah, yeah, and that's really our journey is to move through these different layers that are covering over this, and then ultimately we see that each layer is not the truth, and then we go a layer deeper. We see that that's not the truth, and then at this very bottom layer, this fear of God, we do come to see that that's not the truth too. But usually we have to overcome some fear or some resistance to get to that and then through that. So this is why A Course in Miracles doesn't just happen like that. We read the part of the book or go through the workbook, and all of a sudden, we're just enlightened. It almost never happens like that, because we have such fear about what Jesus is teaching us, and we think that there's something to be fearful of. But the good news is that as we go through each layer, we come to see there was nothing there, and that our fear was unfounded. And I think that's really what the message is going to be here too, that we have to really be honest with what we are feeling. If we are feeling afraid, if we are feeling resistant, if we want to run away from this book, a year or two into studying the Course, I remember having this very, very visual image that came to me of setting the Course on fire. I was threatening my ego, and my ego was like, "Oh, you better get away from this thing."
Wow. Well,
Yeah.
that is kind of interesting that the idea of fire comes back into play, where we do have a strong image around fire as being part of God's wrath. So turning around on A Course in Miracles and setting it on fire would be kind of using God's wrath to consume the answer that we got from God, which is an interesting paradox to consider also.
Well, and I think it really brings to light an important detail here, which is that, the ego's God would be vengeful, and it would be fearful, and it would be malicious. And that is really the God that we are fearing. The true God is just pure love. There's nothing to fear there. So when we are afraid of God, we're only ever afraid of an image of God. We're only ever afraid of an idea of God that we ourselves have made up. And it's not real. So in a sense, what we're doing is we are unmasking the truth. We're coming to see that God is not some scary, master over the universe that is kind of making horrible things happen here. God doesn't have anything to do with this universe of time and space. This whole world was made up by us to really kind of push against or hide from God. And it served its purpose. We're very distracted while we're here in the world, and we think that this world might meet our needs. It might give us what we want, and the process that we're in is a process of unlearning these false ideas that this world will ever really give us what we truly want, which is unending happiness, which is peace without limit. And I think I'm just going to jump in here to this section because it's going to speak to a lot of this. So as we're talking about the fourth obstacle, the fear of God, he says, the fourth obstacle to be surmounted hangs like a heavy veil before the face of Christ. Yet, as his face rises beyond it, shining with joy, because he is in his Father's love, peace will lightly brush the veil aside and run to meet him and to join with him at last. For this dark veil, which seems to make the face of Christ himself like to a leper's, and the bright rays of his Father's love that light his face with glory appear as streams of blood, fades in the blazing light beyond it when the fear of death is gone. So he's helping us to see that this is that mask, that scary, bloody, violent image that we have put in front of God, the image of God that we have made up. There's even a famous quote that God created man in his own image, and then man returned the favor. So we have kind of made up this idea of God, but it's not the truth. And that's a core idea here to really undoing the fear and coming to see that what we want is the peace of God, and that we don't have any reason really to hide or run away from this as we approach it.
That is true. And that fear of God always gets distorted and attached to the idea of death, and that God is the one who is running through the universe, striking people dead for whatever perverted reason that God might cultivate. So again, this is how man has created God in mankind's image as the ultimate bastion of clinging to the ego. It is solely for the protection of the ego that we have this idea of God and death being synonymous. And that, in this last week, a friend of mine who had, she had gone through a lot of different stages of evolution and spiritual growth, but she, at the beginning of this new year, had gone through a very horrific experience and with her son. And I just found out a few days ago that she had arrived at a point where she was so overwhelmed that she elected to leave this world for a period of time. And so, that fear of death turns into eventually embracing death, simply because, again, we're holding ourselves off from God and trying to make that ego work. So at some point, she'll undoubtedly pop back in and join with us in the magic dance, and perhaps arrive in a state of consciousness where she recognizes the futility of using death as an actual way of resolving issues that we have in this little microcosm of madness that we inhabit. And I think that looking at this last week, for me, it was one of a little bit of melancholy, but at the same time, it kind of flipped me back to when I was 7 or 6.5, and my father died, and I'm looking in the coffin at his body and recognizing at that very early age that he wasn't dead. His body was obviously immobilized, but I still sensed his presence very much around me. And I think that's one of the things that we need to do is, for our own spiritual growth, when we encounter that presence of death and circumstances that are close to us, like friends and family, we really have to sit in silence and acknowledge that the death of that person is not what we are being drawn downward into, a sense of sorrow by. It's the absence of their body bouncing around us. So once again, it becomes a powerful tool for our own transformation and for our own capacity to look at death as nonsensical and to not allow ourselves to indulge it in any way.
Yeah, and death has that sort of feeling to it, but I just want to say up front, as you're saying, that suicide is never the answer. that there is always another better way. For anyone out there who is struggling with that, just know that when we look at it from the multiple lifetime perspective, that again, whatever pain that you're dealing with now, you're not going to end it by taking your life. That pain will come back and it will show up in a different form. The shorter path to resolution of your pain is always forgiveness. It's always moving through it. Although sometimes you do need to take a break from it if it is too intense. But killing yourself is not really that break that you're looking for. I would suggest that anyone who is struggling with these issues reach out. There are national 24-hour-a-day call lines. There's 1-800-273-8255. If this is an issue you're struggling with, call. Reach out to someone. There's always someone who's willing to listen. And really just know that on the spiritual level too, it's not an answer, because the pain doesn't really leave. As you were saying, Chris, you will just come back in another lifetime and be struggling with that pain again. If there's a way to get help, that's a much better way to move through this.
Oh, absolutely, yes. And it actually compounds itself because there's always guilt associated with an act of self-negation like suicide. And so when you slip into that other realm after having taken that action, you add another layer that you will come back with of guilt. And that really is the core, I think, of suicide and of, deeper levels of depression, is if we have allowed ourselves to believe in the circumstances of our lives to the degree that we believe that they're real. And then we load up on guilt around that. And then it gets even darker. And options start really vanishing in all directions. But it all goes back to that one primary core element of the fear of God and the guilt of having somehow betrayed God, which is something that God is going to sneak up on us and nail us for. And it is a journey through this world that is very tedious and challenging, but we have to work daily on getting to the level where we realize that death is not the answer, and it never was, but that we have to consciously be able to step out of our bodies and enter into that realm of pure spirit. And then if there is a need for another cycle of the body, it'll happen naturally. But to just wake up, run around like a lunatic, and then drop dead over multiple centuries really isn't resolving anything.
Yeah, and there's a beautiful line in the Course, something to the effect that this world is left not by death, but by life. And what he's saying here is that true life, that eternal life, is what really awakens us from this dream of death and suffering. And I think to remember at times that everything that's happening here is a dream, it can make it somewhat more bearable, even as we're going through the tough times. I remember kind of going through something hard in my life a few years ago and just expressing just deep gratitude that it wasn't really real. I was like, okay, this might seem like a really big mess, but at least it's not actually happening.
Right. The non-reality of it is being reinforced almost on an hourly basis if anybody is really paying attention to what's going on in society as a whole. I think that this whole year has been rife with things that are so nonsensical and opportunities to look at situations that simply are beyond absurd. And we have to be willing to look at those things and then let go of it and forget.
Yeah. So I think that just kind of brings us even further into this. A couple paragraphs further, Jesus says, "See how the belief in death would seem to save you. For if this were gone, what could you fear but life? It is the attraction of death that makes life seem to be ugly, cruel, and tyrannical. You are no more afraid of death than of the ego. These are your chosen friends. For in your secret alliance with them, you have agreed never to let the fear of God be lifted, so you could look upon the face of Christ and join him in his Father." So he's really telling us that, we think we want happiness and peace, but a deep part of us is actually longing for the suffering, longing for the fear and the anger. And it's important to see that we are, we're choosing this on some level. Otherwise, we can't ever unchoose it. But the next little bit is a little more hopeful. He says, "Every obstacle that peace must flow across is surmounted in just the same way. The fear that raised it yields to the love beyond, and so the fear is gone. And so it is with this." So he's letting us know that no matter how tough this journey sometimes seems, no matter how challenging our circumstances are, that all of this will heal. There is no question. There is no uncertainty about that. Everything that the ego presents, every pain, every suffering, every challenge will end. And it will end in happiness. It will end in joy. It will end in harmony of all together in that beautiful oneness. So that's our goal, is to really just move through whatever is showing up for us. And like we're just saying, don't be afraid to ask for help. Sometimes we can ask for help spiritually. We can ask Holy Spirit or Jesus, "Hey, I really need your help. I don't know what to do here." At times we'll get feedback right away. We'll feel like we're getting help. Other times it might seem to take some time, but don't be afraid to keep asking. And don't be afraid to ask on the level of the physical too. Reach out to someone who can help you. Chris and I work with a lot of people who are feeling like they need help, and this is our role in this world. So you can reach out to us, reach out to a friend, reach out to anyone who could be there for you and could help you through what you're going through. Just know that both spiritually and physically, you are not alone. There's always someone there for you. So I think that's really helpful when we're going through something that's tough.
It is. It absolutely is. And, I have discovered that when I am in conditions where I am challenged beyond my means to deal with the moment, that if I do that invocation and ask for the Christ consciousness, the presence of Jesus, to connect with me, I have always sensed that presence revealing itself. And even though there may not be any direct words that enter into my mind, simply having that presence brings forth that one thing that is referred to as the peace that passeth understanding. And if you can step into that peace, if you can embrace that, then you can get through. And you can, enter into the next day and the next day and the next day until eventually all of our days are completely over and we're back into eternity.
That's beautiful. I think that's kind of a nice note for us to start winding down here, to know that we are all inevitably moving towards that experience of oneness. So we're all in this together. As Jesus says, our journey home is together or not at all. And we are all in that oneness. There's none of us that are left out.
Absolutely. And the irony of it all is that it's actually already over and done. And we're just having total recall, and we need to stop taking those drugs that give us total recall.
I'm Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'm an action hero. I'm going to go to Mars and save the planet.
Yes, and take steroids all the way there. Anyway, Barrett, well, it was a very enjoyable dialogue once again, and in 7 days we will reconvene, and in that interim, Gary Renard and Cindy will be in Chicago for those of you who would like to have more of a live experience with A Course in Miracles.
Yeah, I will definitely be there. Chris might be able to attend some of it too. So yeah, come join us, and we'd love to see you there if it works for you. It's this Saturday and Sunday, August 13th and 14th. You can go Google Infinity Foundation. They're hosting Gary and Cindy, and that'll get you all the information that you need.
Well, mi amigo, I think it's time for us to saddle up and get our little doggies on down the road here.
Ooh-wee, right on into the sunset.
There you go. So with that echo of happy trails in the background, we will see you in 1 week.
Sounds good. Bye, everyone.
Bye.